What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, I want to give a big shout out to the brother Robert Mason for the $5 donation via the PayPal. I saw your note. It was regard to the video I did about Barry Bonds. We all know that Barry Bonds is a Hall of Famer. Like you said, even those who competed against Barry Bonds when he first entered the majors in 1986, they knew that he had the goods, all the tools to be one of the greats of all times. The only real weakness that he had is he didn't have the strongest throwing arm. All right? But Barry Bonds was a five-tool player, and even before the so-called questionable years with the Giants, he was already a solidified first ballot Hall of Famer. The difference between him and David Ortiz is that David Ortiz kissed the media's ass, while Barry Bonds, told the media to kiss his ass. And that's the reason why one of them is in the Hall of Fame and the other one is not. That's the main reason. Because we know that David Ortiz was actually on the list for using PEDs, but he got forgiven for somehow, for some reason. So fuck them, all right? But shout out to you for showing love to the channel. All right, so shout out to the brother LB, because he did a live stream talking about this yesterday, and that is this growing threat to the Gulf of Mexico. All right, it's a growing threat for a major hurricane to strike. I believe it will be late next week in the Gulf. Now, a couple of days ago, I think the threat area was from all the way from Texas to Florida. I think, though, today, from what I've read, it seems to be more of a threat from Florida, Alabama, Mississippi. I think it's pushed a little bit more to the east. It's not solidified, so if you live in Texas, Louisiana, all right, still keep a watch to this, because it still could change and it could still affect you. Because we already know the damage that Hurricane Katrina has done. We've known the damage that Hurricane Harvey and some of these other storms have done. Incidentally, there was a stretch, if I'm not mistaken, from 2009 to 2017, I think it was, or 16. There was a 8-year stretch or something like that where a hurricane did not strike the Gulf of Mexico, which was very unusual. But then all of a sudden, these back-to-back years, we've had these storms strike the Gulf of Mexico. The strongest ones that come to mind, I believe, were Irma, Michael, which was a Category 5, and I think Dorian, I believe, also struck Florida and went up the coast, or I can't remember whether Dorian struck Florida or whether Dorian struck from the Atlantic. I can't quite remember, but I want to say Hurricane Dorian struck Florida, but I can't be certain about that. But anyway, the new threat is a storm. Right now, I believe it's a low. But this particular storm is projected to be a devastating hurricane that's going to affect the southeastern United States late next week into the week after. Now, of course, you have Hurricane Fiona that's out there right now. I think it's hitting Bermuda or just hit Bermuda. Now, of course, it flattened Puerto Rico. It was a direct hit, flattened Puerto Rico. I think it's going to affect Bermuda but not be a direct hit, but it will hit southeastern Canada. It's going to be the strongest hurricane to ever affect southeastern Canada on record. But that storm is not one we have to worry about. It's not going to affect the mainland United States. As a matter of fact, the hurricane season so far has been one that has been rather uneventful. The National Hurricane Center had predicted this is going to be a very above active year, but we had not seen that. A lot of that had to do with the Saharan dust that was very prominent coming off of the coast of Africa, which helped to suppress many of these storms. The dust is infamous for robbing the atmosphere of the energy needed for these storms, these thunderstorms that come off the coast of Africa to develop into tropical disturbances and ultimately tropical storms and hurricanes. But this dust has now dissipated, and at the wrong time, because this is the most active time for hurricane season. So anyway, the weather models, both the European and GPS, are projecting that over the next several days, this disturbance, 98L Invest, I believe it's called, is forecasted to move northwestward across the southern Windward Islands at the Caribbean's eastern edge and then move toward the central Caribbean Sea later in the week, the Hurricane Center said Wednesday morning. By late next week, both models show the storm entering the Gulf of Mexico. The American model, or GPS model, shows the storm as a large and possibly major hurricane. It shows it making landfall in the panhandle of Florida by September 30th. The European model has it hitting the southern section of Florida a day earlier, but as a much more compact and smaller, but nearly as intense hurricane. If the storm system makes it into the Gulf like the forecast models say, the conditions are ripe for development. The water is extremely warm, and the atmosphere is very conducive for rapid development. You know, I'm not an expert, okay? I'm not an expert, don't pretend to be one, but I'm a person that observes people who know what they're talking about. And one thing I have noticed is that over the last couple of years, for some particular reason, hurricanes, maybe because of the warming waters in the Gulf, whatever it is, I've noticed that a lot of hurricanes have rapidly intensified once they get within 60 miles of landfall. All right, so that is something that we have to look forward to or watch out for. The thing that I'm concerned about is this. Of course, when a hurricane strikes, you have to worry about coastal flooding, beach erosion, inland flooding, of course, damage from winds, rains. When I say coastal flood, I'm talking about the combination of rain plus, there's the Gulf of Mexico with the way that the winds are shifting is going to push sometimes water from the Gulf inland. So that's coastal flooding. But of course, torrential rains, especially if the system slows down, wind damage. Once you have a storm make landfall, the friction from land leads to the development of tornadoes. That's going to be a problem, obviously, especially intense hurricanes. And that's what I'm concerned about. As this storm, if it does do what it says it's going to do, and the models are correct, just based off of past situations, Hurricane Michael, Dorian, what was the storm that we had in 2018? Florence. The path that it's going reminds me of that. I think as the storm moves up the coast, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, maybe Maryland, Delaware, maybe even Pennsylvania, as the storm decays and weakens over land, oftentimes with these dying hurricanes, you start seeing outbreaks of tornadoes. We saw that with Florence here in Richmond, Virginia. You may recall that if you live in this area, September 18th, 2018, I think it was. We had not one, not two, not three, not four, not five, but I believe it was 6 tornadoes that were spotted in the Richmond metro area. 6. We don't usually have that type of weather here. Even if it's not that extreme. that's something you have to worry about with landfall storms, the tornado threat. That could be significant. I remember back in August of 2004, Gaston, there was a tornado that spawned in Richmond, Virginia. I remember back in September of 2004, I think it was, there was a storm, it might have been Francis, that spawned 31 tornadoes in Virginia. So these are some things that can happen when you have these dying storms. Also, the rains can be torrential. You know, not exactly the same storm, not the same path, but I remember Camille, reading about Camille in 1969. Hurricane Camille struck Louisiana as one of the strongest storms in our history. 175 mile per hour sustained winds, gusts up to 210, 220 miles an hour. Just destroyed, flattened Louisiana. But the storm hooked right, and ultimately, as a dying tropical storm depression, it flooded the Appalachian area of Virginia, Western Virginia. I think Eastern Virginia got a lot of rain too, but the western parts of Virginia, just terrible flooding rains, like 25, 30 inches of rain. And then you had Agnes, Hurricane Agnes in 1972, did even more damage. I think it was record flooding with that particular storm. We got to keep an eye on this, all right? Keep an eye on this situation and just hope for the best, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. In particular, if, your local news is telling you, hey, we're going to get hit by a hurricane, take it seriously, prepare. If there are any mandatory evacuations in place, prepare for that possibility if you live in these regions. So anyway, tell me what you guys think.